coming up right now, we have part 2 of Architects of Control. Joining us here is Michael Tsarion. You can find his work at michaeltsarion.com. And, of course, his latest DVD is available at architectsofcontrol.com. Michael is a researcher, an author, a lecturer, and a filmmaker, and most importantly, an alternative historian. And it's always a pleasure to have him on our show.
Okay, let's see if we have Michael on. Hey, Michael, how you doing?
Lovely. It's nice to hear your voice, Sri.
Nice to hear your voice, too, Michael. Last week we were talking about mind control and the different organizations involved in mind control, specifically the Tavistock Institute. I know that's the one I always read about. But you specifically said that America has forgotten who its enemy is, and that these organizations and different mind control operations are not working in the best interests of America or Americans.
Did we lose him?
Uh-oh.
Michael, are you there?
Not only that, but they are the
there he is.
Tavistock specifically is a group, not one of many. The other two that I can think of right away is the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations, because they're all tied in. The Tavistock's job was to put in agent provocateurs within the hippie movement, within the conservatives, within the Democrats, within the evangelism, within the whatever, in every movement, the Black Panthers, the KKK. They're going to put their own members in there, because like Jesuits, they're taught to blend in. They use camouflage to blend themselves in with it as fifth columnists, so that you create so many of those rival dynasties that, Chris, you were talking about earlier on, that then you can't see the wood, the forest for the trees. That's why Americans have forgotten who their direst enemy is. They've forgotten that the Vatican swore that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, I got personal problems with those, but let's just for argument's sake to speak historically, the Vatican is saying those are evil documents. George III is saying, "Down with America, I proclaim eternal war on America." Americans have forgot who their enemy is. They left the door open because the Tavistock Institution and groups like that, of which the Heritage Association, the Brookings Institute, Rand Corporation, the Chicago Institution, Stanford University, the Hoover Institute, SRI, the list goes on. There's so many of these organizations that work for Britain, and they do it obviously, openly. Not only the prime ministers and certain of these advisors are bending their knees to the royal families, like Joe Kennedy did, and Brzezinski has done, and Eagleburger has done, and so many other guys have done. If people go to my article, Weapons of Mass Destruction Found, I've got the quotes from these people to show you not only that they were Anglophiles, not only that they wanted their sons and daughters to marry into the British royal family, but that they've even gone over there and received the awards. Schwarzkopf, Colin Powell, endless lines of people, they're traitors to America, going over there and kneeling down on their bony knees to this demoness, because they've done good work, and they've done it since the time of George Washington. I've even got George Washington and Madison and these people, and Benjamin Franklin, also were as agents, not only of the Rothschild dynasty, but of these black Venetian people. And we have the evidence for this now, it's coming out. But as you said, they create so much turmoil, so much broken china in the country, so much turmoil and so much minutia, that people get absorbed into that. And that's what this political thing is all about. Just in the same way that during the O.J. Simpson trial, the Newt Gingriches were signing away America's rights, one after the other, every day on the hour, and everybody was just focused on whether O.J. is going to hang or not. So they create a war here. So they create a debacle there. So they create some other weird, thing over there, so that you're blinded, you're not thinking of what they're doing. These rival dynasties do exist, but many of them, these dynastic rivalries, and many of them are orchestrated. The Illuminati itself, by the way, got created from a rival dynasty between two factions of the Catholic Church, or let's more specifically say the Vatican Club, or the secret societies, of which there are many. There are actually hundreds in the Vatican, but they had a split.
All right, and hold on, I don't mean to cut you off, Michael, but just for everybody who's listening, what we're talking about is the discussion from last week, how you have this one faction and they keep on splitting with each other because they're trying to get control. But, Michael, can you tell us a little bit about why this particular faction split with each other?
It had something to do with the fact that the Jesuits had a falling out with other cardinals. Other cardinals didn't like the power that the Jesuits were amassing for themselves. And they suppressed the Jesuits. They literally excommunicated them. They tried to close down the whole Jesuit order. This is within Catholicism. And the Jesuits responded by having to create the Illuminati, whose first job was to fight their own guys. One of its purposes was to help the Jesuits fight Catholic oppressors.
So how did the Illuminati go from fighting the Catholic oppressors to where they are today?
When a few years had passed and the Jesuits were back in the control,
Uh-huh.
the Illuminati had to take on, a different sort of a color, because his first purpose was now rendered null and void. They gained back the power after a little dynastic rivalry, then that passed away, and now you have this beautiful edifice all created, which was originally just for your own purposes to hide behind. Now it was turned to even a yet more sinister purpose, and of course, what do all history books say? Oh, it was Adam Weishaupt, the champion of anti-royalism, the champion of anti-religion. He's going to free us all. In their own paperwork, they're telling you they're anti-royalist and that they're anti-religion. What a lot of nonsense.
So when I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add that the founder of the Illuminati was Charles de Lorraine, who was the brother of the King of Austria. It was actually royalists that founded and funded the Illuminati. It wasn't Adam Weishaupt. In fact, the last 40 years of Adam Weishaupt's life, he languished in luxury at the King of Austria's royal estates.
Wow.
How on earth can, as most of the history books and most of these not well-researched people are telling you that this guy was anti-royalist. He spent his last days languishing in luxury in the houses of the royals of Europe, the Austrian Habsburgian kings, like Charles de Lorraine and his brother and their wives and so forth and so on. And secondly, how can they then turn around and say he's anti-papist, he's anti-Vatican, when the Vatican never even glitched? It's been going as strong from the 1776 when the Illuminati was created till the present day without even a single blip. Mussolini, if anything. There's been other guys who've done a little bit more damage than the Vatican, not much. And then they're telling us that the Illuminati, if the Illuminati really wanted to have, brought down the Vatican, it would have done it by now. But it's not, because they're all funded and controlled by those same secret societies.
So we're basically seeing the rise of the Holy Roman Empire.
Never seen the fall of it, as far as I'm concerned. When a thing goes backstage, doesn't mean it's gone from history. It may look. And remember, they're funding all the historians, so the history will appear whatever damn well way they want it to appear. So
you're saying that the Holy Roman Empire is going to come to the front. Is that what we're going to see ultimately? Yeah. It's always been there, but they have an agenda, of course, which they live out through time. That's partly technical, it has economics involved in it, politics, of course, the controllership and ownership of the world, partly, the fending off of legitimate. I would say that one of the most important reasons remember I said that the Illuminati had a second purpose after its first purpose was solved? One of its second purposes is what did it do? It made a perfect foe rival. They kept the Illuminati in existence because they knew that if they didn't, true rivals will appear on the street. The real gunman will be calling you out for a showdown. Better fund and organize and create your own enemy.
Kind of like the CIA created Al-Qaeda.
Precisely. Now, of course, remember, we were talking about the Muslim Brotherhood. The Al-Qaedas and these groups are all part of the Muslim Brotherhood that I told you we were talking about was originally Judite. This is this Masonic organization that at a call, at the snap of a finger, can be immediately brought out of the box. And it's just a matter of simple, what costume you're going to wear today, what act of the play are we at right now? Who's going to be called on the stage right now for the edification of the population? But we've got to realize that the psychological aspect is what we see on the screen is actually projected there partly by our own unconscious. But you can never have total revelation or any type of enlightenment without the education first. So mankind is actually getting a chance now to really be educated as the real history of the world goes on. And that will, as it did for me, take ordinary people into philosophy, into psychology, into sociology, into occultism. Go for it. It's all right. It doesn't mean that you have to jeopardize it. The C.S. Lewis's and J.R. Tolkien's, who were Christians, they were able to embrace it. Why the hell shouldn't the average American?
Exactly.
If it's good enough for those guys and they didn't have to lose their Christian faith by turning on, then I can't see any problem.
Yeah, for our listeners who don't know who J.R.R. Tolkien is, it's a guy that wrote Lord of the Rings. C.S. Lewis wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and both are very good allegorical books about Christianity, but using a spiritual angle that's really hard for most modern-day Christians to accept. You talk about the anatomy of consciousness in your latest documentary, Architects of Control. Can you explain to our listeners a little bit more about that?
Yes. Never forget that, it starts basically I think that one of the most important things when you're studying psychology is that it becomes instantly the least least objective of study that you'll ever be involved in. Meaning that, say, for instance, just as a metaphor, you were to sit down at a coffee shop one day and read a book on Freud or by Freud or whatever. Just open and skim through, His books are actually quite slim. They're very, very short. You could read one of his books in a day, like Totem and Taboo or Civilization and Its Discontents or what have you. Within seconds of reading any psychology book, even if it's written by Freud or Jung, you're going to suddenly have a cold sweat because they're talking about you. You've opened the book to learn about psychology, and your gaze is out on the street and the people you know, and, oh yeah, I'd like to learn about this, how people tick. And within a few lines, within a few pages, guess what? It becomes very, very subjective. Oh my God, I do that. Oh my God, I walk like that. Oh my God, I think of myself like that. Yes, my posture is like that. I do relate to other people like that. Oh my God, I have said that to, my partner. Or my partner relates like that. Instantaneously, it becomes the most subjective thing.
Why do you think that is?
Because all human beings are identical in one way. They all have a sense of their own personal uniqueness. They all have the same anatomy of the psyche, you see. And that image that you have of yourself is very much based on the societies in which you live. They know this because they've studied even out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences in which when any type of angelic form comes in front of you, it's always colored by the religion in which you've been brought up, without fail. So they know that there's a tremendous capacity in the mind for this. So every human being subjectively is built out of the same stuff, so to speak. And so psychology is a thing that is about you. And we have been trained in society, and you don't need to be Ayn Rand to know this, that the last thing that you are really interested in is yourself. Now, this sounds like a paradox because you imagine, and many people who have even written books and are meant to be thinkers tell you that we're too narcissistic, we're far too self-absorbed. Nothing could be further from the truth. And anyone who ever tells you that, they don't know what they're talking about. Man is walking around, his problem is complete selflessness, which can also be described as altruism, and other language can be used for that. But we are dealing with the self-murdered man. We are dealing with the self-betrayed man. We are dealing with a man who will give his life for everything to do with another person. His sense of his selfhood is almost non-existent. And I'm completely aware that when I say this, I know that people are just saying, no, you're wrong, and they can't understand it. It's because, again, from miseducation, from not looking at the problem correctly, we imagine that first of all, we imagine it's great to be selfless. We've got a tremendous misinterpretation of what that word means. And we have a very big delusion, just as big as we have about what change means, when it comes to what the real self is. The self is not this simulacra. It's not this analog self, which is the ego. Because actually, do you know that the ego is actually a phantasm? The ego doesn't even exist. It's just an idea you have about the self, which is not the self, and everybody's walking around with this. How can everybody, it almost sounds even like an oxymoron when you say that everybody is unique. Why haven't we ever thought about that? Is it really true that everybody's unique? Or is it true that everybody is infected by an idea of that they are unique, when in fact that's been totally conditioned not only by parents, but by the society? And there's a philosopher, the very famous philosopher George Frederick
Hegel,
he went into this, where Hegel's entire philosophy, including his philosophy or his ideas about how the state should control a man's life, is based on a philosophy that has to do with the self-image that people have. Hegel decided that man does not have a true, unique sense of self or identity. It's absolutely a social persona. Because he said that man cannot think of himself without thinking about how others view him. And therefore there's no such thing as identity. And from that, in a long chain, I'm making it very brief here, but it's from theories like that. Whether they be wrong, whether they be right, is not as important. The fact is that Hegel then said that if man in fact is just, has no sense of self, if his entire sense of who he is based on what society has programmed him, then society is more important than the individual, and guess what, guys? Here we are. It's based on these Hegelian principles that the very society in which everyone is living today, that the teachers are teaching this to the kids, that every collective, regimented thing, and I don't care if it's the doctors, I don't care if it's the teachers, the politicians, this whole collectivism, which is non-selfhood, obviously, by definition, is based on the very philosophies of people who worked out elegantly that there is no such thing as the self. And so that's what comes full circle to what I said, is I think we're living in a completely selfless societies. And this is one of the things that can never change, guys, we can never change until we really address the whole question of the self. And my favorite person, of course, for that is Ayn Rand, who went blue in the face trying to deal with this question. And to this day, Ayn Rand is not even mentioned in philosophy encyclopedias and dictionaries. In some of the most prestigious and mainstream dictionaries of philosophy, her name does not even appear, because her work strikes at the root of all these Hegelian philosophies and Kantian philosophies, you see, that they want to infect everybody with, and they know the consequences to their lie if somebody like Ayn Rand's teachings was to be broadly disseminated. And so they've libeled her and twisted her teachings, you see, because the whole edifice will crumble if people really got round what the real essentials of her work was. That's not that I don't have problems with her. I know where she went wrong in certain areas. My opinion, there's some things that are not so great, but basically her concepts of the self is very, very important for the modern world and for modern man to get round. The very tyrannies that he's living under are absolutely based on, they're rooted in a man's false understanding of himself, his ego, his social ego.
Well, how do we get past this illusion of self?
It's, again, Taoist in nature. You cannot see the self directly. You can't know it directly. But what you can do with the human reason is to know what it is not. And that is what's called apophatic learning, or negation. It's what the word negative means with a capital N. You have to think negatively. Oh my God, don't say that, Michael. We're going to lock you up. Right? Here we go with this cult of positivism. But again, I'm just using the words in their purest sense, and people can, think of what the hell they want. The point is that the word negative has a very positive meaning in many ways. In fact, don't we even call negative ionization the good ionization, and positive ionization is the worst kind for your health? Well, it's the same kind of idea. Thinking negatively from a philosophical construct is what you want to do. Somebody may prefer the word Socratic, thinking Socratically. And what it means is to try to analyze, through the process of reason, what is not true. The great philosopher J. Krishnamurti said, when the lie is seen as a lie, the truth is. So what I've always talked about in the Irish Origins DVD and other work I've done is to try and help people to develop that type of perception. It can be done, by the way. You know why? Because it's natural. As we spoke of before in the earlier part of the show, it is natural, but it's been canalized. The educational systems that we have are to decondition us, detrain us from this critical type of thought patterning. And I'm glad, I don't know if you guys have had on John Taylor Gatto or any guy like that, who talks about education.
No, not yet, but we plan to get him on in the near future.
He'll go into all of this because, again, and just like J. Krishnamurti and Rudolf Steiner, many of these other people were adamant. They already knew that you can't talk to the adult. The adult's made out of stone. He's not going to change. So they focused their attention on the youth to try and help that child doubt the teacher. Oh my God, what a concept. In those schools in J. Krishnamurti, because I come from that tradition, so I know it's a fact, the teacher stands up not as a paragon of knowledge. He is asking that, he makes these statements, he talks about his life, or he brings up the subject that they're meant to be studying, and the pupils in the class are just meant to regale the teacher. How do you know that? Why do you want us to believe that? Is it really true? How did you come to that conclusion? Try doing that today in the schools today.
Well, they'd have a fit. That's how the school system works nowadays. They tell you what you need to think because it's what they've been told to tell you to think, and then you have to regurgitate it onto a piece of paper at the end of the semester, and you're going to erase
your natural intelligence that might in the back of your mind be saying, I don't think that's really correct. You're going to silence that voice, just like your parents have done, like they have forced you to do. Not all parents, of course. So this is the process that takes place.
Wow.
So there's no changing it until we realize how there are other terms for it, but apophatic, apophatic, is a way of, through negation, it's very much what a detective does. It's by excluding. There's an immensely important statement that was made. It's in the context of the Sherlock Holmes character, but it was actually written by Conan Doyle. And it's this. He says that once you exclude the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. And this is an actual axiomatic thing that can be done in your own life. Discover what is false. Have an eye and an understanding and discernment to see it instantaneously. So my ultimate goal, my ultimate movement, whether it's with children or with adults, is to help the child awaken and to even reinforce that particular natural flow. It doesn't need to really be taught at all. It's already in human beings. And I've seen this in children. It's marvelous. It's absolutely marvelous. The natural flow of criticalness. That's what separates us from everything else in the universe, is the reason. And reason is critical judgment and, this whole criticism and judgment. And you're using it to analyze everything that's in the world, every belief system about yourself. And then that will help. If you do it to yourself, it helps to erode, just like Hegel did it for himself. It helps to erode that false ego. He just came up with the wrong conclusion. He was so convinced that, your thoughts are collective, that's where he went. But other philosophers could do the same analysis and say, oh my goodness, I see the falsity of this, but that helps me to really realize what the real self is. But you must start the process because it's different for each person. So in other words, the other thing that needs to be understood here is that every form of tuition that I talk about is subjective. It cannot be collectivized. Each person's level of discovery within these models that I'm talking about would be their own form. It would be colored by you, Chris. By whoever is there is going to be their own. And so in other words, there can't be any A to Z. There's no manual. Therefore, there's really no schooling required, or at least you can have schooling, but not in this totalitarian way that is happening now. Each person's journey to the enlightenment, there's no path. You make the path as you walk. And therefore, this strikes then at the heart of all institutionalized type of things that are going on in the world today. And that's a big model. That's a very practical thing that people can do. Setting up schools and centers of learning in this particular way with this element is far more imaginative and creative than anything they've got going. And again, if the public wants to do it, they can do it overnight if they want to. I mean, the other system's crumbling under their feet. I mean, they're going to have to find something else to do because the system as is utterly dysfunctional. And again, I love it. Great. Let it pass away. If you see something rotten falling, let it fall.
Yeah, don't try to tie a string on the end of an apple and keep it hanging there. If it's going to fall, it's going to fall, Yeah,
don't be running over and giving it mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, going, oh, we just need you so badly. Right. The fact is, it's destroyed because it needed to be destroyed, because nature doesn't take out anything that is holistic. If something is in order or is in equilibrium, it exists and it remains existing, and if it even changes its form, it'll come back in another great form. If something's in disequilibrium, disharmony, it needs to go. And you know something? The world needs to get back in touch with that Zen, shall I say, or Taoist model. And it's in your personal life, very much so, and extending from there into the society in which you live. The person who has the understanding of that model is the only one who can survive, because they're not going to be trying to cling to the banks when the river of change, you see, is going to take you to a much better place.
Wow, that's really eloquently put.
Absolutely.
It kind of reminds me of kids that grow up in religious institutions or private schools, and they are force-fed information for so long that they don't even know themselves when they finally do grow up. They don't know themselves or the society they live in, and they end up going on psychopharmaceuticals, they end up going on drugs, and they fall apart. And it's really sad.
Yeah, it's hard for them to stay inside of that system. I had a problem with that. They wanted to put me on Ritalin. Thank God my parents wouldn't let them. But anybody who wants to think outside of the box, there's something immediately wrong with them. And I think that's a big problem in our society. But it's due to these repeaters. I think David Icke is the one who talks about the repeaters. And these teachers are the repeaters. The professors are the repeaters. The doctors are the repeaters over and over and over again. Now, I guess the next question that I would pose to you, Michael, is do you think that this is all, are they just victims? Are they working from the inside? Or were they recruited? What do you think about these teachers?
These teachers are for the most part, either apologists, 100% apologists for the totalitarian systems of mind control that we're involved in, or they do know better but can't speak up because, again, they got no guts. They won't stand up and do something different. And remember we talked about, especially in context of children, one happier note is that, remember we spoke about earlier that there is an actual element of true rebellion within each soul.
Right.
Right.
And it's in this day and age is when it could start coming out more than it's ever done before and in a more productive way. That's in the kids. The children, the youth need to learn how to use their dissatisfaction and use their, what was the word I used before, the desperation and that pain as a motive, as a catalyst to doing what is right. Instead of sinking into it and letting it rule you, letting it rule them, they need to become alive because of that. That's a very healthy thing. You're not going to find a creative person in this world, and I don't care if it's, Ludwig van Beethoven or Van Gogh, or even more modern examples within rock and roll or heavy metal or whatever it is, that always will be found. The inspiration equals desperation philosophy, but this time ride it like a horse. Let it use it to go towards something greater. And what will happen is that slowly that seed of rebellion will awaken again within the person, because every human being, even the most conformist person, has within their soul, or let's say the unconscious, there is the true self, not the analogous self that is the ego that's in the light, so to speak. In the darker, repressed parts of the consciousness is the true spirit of rebellion, the true spirit of individualism, our true self, in other words. But of course we've repressed it so much it can only talk to us through dreams and all that. And then we do relate to it when it's projected in movies, on the Neptunian screen, because those things are projections of the unconscious, partly created by our masters who know how to alleviate and expatiate and exercise these things so we stay under control, but not all of them. Some of them are created by people who desperately want us to awaken, and those are the great masterpieces that we love, both in painting and in music and in art and film and all of that. Some of them are legitimate statements of true existential freedom, and they're relating to that spirit of rebellion. So we never must ever lose faith in that within the true deepest psyche of man there is a spirit of rebellion, but as soon as it awakens, it has two forms of rivalry. One is from the rest of the mind, which has been conditioned by the world, going, shut up, silent, man is, in other words, an inner tension. And then he faces the external tension as well. So when you spoke earlier about how they run into pharmaceuticals and how people are just drugged by TV and they just want to tune out, it's because they're actually suffering from multiple levels of resistance. They have the resistance of the whole of their psyche against that spirit, that's the conditioned psyche. They're then suffering the external version, which is more correctly called suppression. So they have repression from within their own being, the forces of repression, and they have the forces of suppression from the world outside. That's a lot to handle, and therefore it's not surprising when you look around at the world. So when I look around at the world, I never feel any form of pessimism necessarily. I maybe do with a small p, but I don't really feel it with a big P, because you'd be mad to. This is being by design. I've studied how it happens, and therefore it's not surprise to me that I see this happening, and men doing to themselves what they're doing, And once you've seen the levels of self-sadism, because remember, the repression is a form of violence. Repression, another word for repression, is violence. It's self-violence. Psychologists call it masochism, or I would like to refer to it as self-sadism. When you truly see the level of violence that a man or a woman commits to their own self, nothing in this world can then, horrify you or surprise you when you see external versions of it in the outer world. It's only because there's no police or prosecutors or judges that you call when a man is murdering himself.
Right.
There's no justice at all in the external form. We only have learned, again, here we go again, one more lie, one more form of conditioning that works on the human mind is our misunderstandings of violence. The greatest violence that man does and has ever done in history is to his own self. That's the province of psychology. So earlier, Chris, when you were talking about what's the message of psychology, one of them, a handy thing to learn, like a rule of thumb, is for people to really focus on how violent they are to themselves. I went into this in the web stream 2012, The Future of Mankind, about how every day we're saying, I'm not tall enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good looking enough, I'm not rich enough, I'm not spiritual enough, I'm not this enough, I'm not that enough, Again, why? Because we're contrasting it, just like Hegel said. We are always comparing ourselves with this person, that person, and they're doing the same to us. And this whole stupid fiasco has been going on for centuries. And the sole result is that people are just hating themselves. When you hate yourself, you're not a self. You do have narcissism, which ultimately is a form of self-hate. But just like we talked about it earlier, man has no sense of his self. This is the prime datum. This is the fundamental fact This is the fundamental common denominator, is the narcissist, the malignantly narcissistic self, the ego, the analogous ego, the social persona, if you want to call it that, that is standing in the place of where the true self should be. If man's inner republic is that messed up, then till the cows come home, you can try to replace the furniture, you move the furniture around in the political Titanic as much as you like. You can come with the greatest thinkers. They can line up in front of the king. You can have every kind of, version of politics, democracies, republics, tyrannies, oligarchies, plutocracies, timarchies. You can have the whole gamut. And you can have them for thousands of years. And you know something? It'll be the same bloody lettuce, tossed up in 100 different ways, and it'll taste like crap. It's not going to change. And so the message, and I'm so glad that we, are getting such a positive response from Architects of Control and all this work that we're doing on this particular psychological angle, because, my God, it's the most important thing. It's not that you then negate politics. You must keep one eye open onto that world, and you must see it, but you must also see the currents that flow under it, why it came into being. Why is there something there as opposed to nothing? What's going on here? How do they use the Gores and the Obamas and the Bushes? What's this whole thing with the animus? George Bush has a very interesting chart. The position of the sun, which is the animus, is very, very prominent in his chart. That means he represents an animus figure. So did Bill Clinton. So did Ronald Reagan. You see, so we might look at it this way. Now, Obama, being black-skinned, also represents an animus, but it's a bit of a tie-in of what they call the shadow, the psychological shadow. Why has that suddenly come up? We all know they wanted Hillary in. She certainly had more political not only ambition, but she has more political standing than he does. So why did they choose him? Is there some psychological reason there? I believe there is. So we need to also monitor that as to find out why, what kind of psychological underpinnings all of this story has. But never lose sight of the fact that there is a spirit of rebellion in each of us. And how many forces then are around us trying to erase that spirit? If you taught children about that, then they become critics of their society, and they wouldn't be as cynical, and they wouldn't be as jaded, and they wouldn't be as semi-criminal or fully criminal as they are right now. Those are responses because they're not being taught the real story of who they are, and they're completely lost and delinquent. That's what this is a result of, doing the wrong thing for so many years.
Mike, we got to go to break real quick, but ladies and gentlemen, you have been listening to Michael Tsarion. You can find his work at michaeltsarion.com. We're discussing his new DVD, Architects of Control. You can find that at architectsofcontrol.com. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Truth Frequency, and we'll be right back in just a few minutes.
All I would say is that we've got to not trust the media stories when any of these, atrocities take place. You've got to really search out and seek out for yourself and not believe what the mainstream media is telling you. You have to realize that this is a very ancient thing. It's very sophisticated, and that you'll have to realize that religion plays a key part because it deals with the emotions of man, his irrational drives, and his needs. Man being raped on one side of what he really is spiritually, loss of center. So when you see these Sirhans, you see in these Hinkley's and these apparently lost souls, who are easily manipulated, you got to realize that that is the guy next door. This is pretty much walking around in the world, and the way they do it is also very interesting. How the whole process of how an actual mind control slave is made runs along pretty typical lines. They have traditional ways of doing it. It's very much based on your own profile when they've been studying you independently without your knowledge. And also, of course, we find out that many of these individuals who've gone down that road, who've been so abused this way, were in fact involved with the corps, or the the United Nations, or the media, the military. You cannot even document the cases of the people who've gone on to commit these crimes, including Oswald and Son of Sam, David Berkowitz, and other people. They've all had some sort of background in the military, or they've all worked for some sort of United Nations group, or military corps, or Peace Corps, or whatever. They've had some tie-in with some major orgs, and sometimes a lot more, sometimes full-blown, military intelligence kinds of organizations. And we even know that the conspiracy movement and the New Age movement is infiltrated by these people. There's all sorts of levels on this, all the way from the spiritual level, with religion affecting your mind and disempowering you in order to control every action, every thought you think, all the way down to this more street level, mind control, where kids are recruited from school because teachers who are in the pay of these, think tanks observe the child, observe their spiritual tendencies, observe their introverted nature. Because you'll always hear the same refrain. It's a very, very common refrain, which you pick up in Mark Hinckley, because he specifically was a virtuous man, actually. And his crimes were born out of a virtue that was manipulated. His virtue was to save the young from all the pestilence and evil that he saw that was rampant in the adult world. So the mind controllers would have picked up on this. And they would have looked at his profile and say, this man is, kind of humanitarian. He's a bit of a loner. So he was a kind of a loner in school. Yet, as a loner, he joined the military. Why would a loner? See, there's a contradiction right there. And they pick up on that. Why would a loner be joining something which is not only collectivized, it's highly collectivized, it's very regimented. So then they pick up conflict in his personality. And then he joins a collectivized kind of setup, like the military, and then it's still super introverted. His buddies will say, oh, we didn't go on with him, he never spoke, he was dead quiet. So you've got little contradictions there. Why would a man even like that be compelled to join something totally antithetical to his nature? Was he compelled to do that? Or was he trying to break out of his own, personality mold and try to do that as a way to, heal himself from what he thought was a malignancy of nature? Because if you're introverted and live in the West or live in America, they'll make you feel that you're malignant, all right. It's not that introversion is malignant, quite the contrary. As the psychologists know, it's the extrovert personality type that's the easiest hypnotized. Ha ha ha. The extrovert personality, Mr. Sunshine, the one-season world, getting gung-ho guy who's super successful, got everything that the material world can offer. He goes under in 2 seconds flat, but it's the introvert that you kind of, manipulate. Well, so this is the, again, contradiction.
And welcome back to Truth Frequency. I am Chris Gio, and I'm joined as always by the lovely, lovely socio student. We are speaking with Michael Tsarion. He is an author, a researcher, a filmmaker, a lecturer, and an alternative historian. You can find his work at michaeltsarion.com. And that was a clip from his new DVD, Architects of Control, which we are discussing. You can find that at architectsofcontrol.com. Now, Michael, if I can shift the subject for a moment, I know you talk a lot about expanding the consciousness, opening up your mind, things like that. So we recently had Dr. Rick Strassman on. He's the author of DMT, the Spirit Molecule. And I wanted to get your take on dimethyltryptamine, ayahuasca, and the shamanistic rituals that people use. What do you think about that?
I never speak for anybody else. As I said, my whole philosophy is for people to have the complete freedom. I'm basically an anarchist. There should be no governments, and there should be no controls. And as long as you're not breaking the law and hurting somebody else, then person should be able to try everything that exists in this world at least once. I can tell you, I very rarely talk about my own private life, but no, I'm actually personally against drugs of almost every kind, except in maybe situations under strict shamanic auspices.
I completely agree.
And remember, the earth is yours. The earth is every human being's altar and a shrine. And every leaf that grows on it, every snowflake that appears, every tree is basically you can enter into a relationship with it. We should have no restrictions at all. In one way, don't you see that it's a paradox, isn't it? Because if you take that theory, what I'm saying, to the nth degree, then perhaps there should be no borders even. There should be no nations. But then how easily that plays into what people would say Big Brother wants. So it's a fine line. Philosophically speaking, maybe man would be better off if there wasn't any boundaries and borders. And since they're all artificial anyway, we have to look very broadly at that and say, okay, but then we say, okay, Big Brother is asking you for the same thing. But do they want it for the real reasons? I'm talking about maybe that if nationhood was to fade away or boundaries and borders would fade away, it's because we'd move up a few steps towards a higher spiritual understanding of life, where that we'd be able to roam and go and see our brothers at all corners of the world, and we'd be able to visit nature, and we'd have a greater feeling of, uninhibitedness with the world. Big Brother is telling you get rid of nationhoods because they want to box you into something even worse than that.
They want a global slavery grid.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and exactly, a global incarceration, but they have to sell you the carrot of turning down your nationhood. But then we talk about spiritually, so it's an ongoing debate. I believe that spiritually there's a lot to be said about Perhaps, we shouldn't have the borders and we shouldn't have, the restrictions that we have, but that's only coming from a vision of this impediment that we have, where otherwise you need passports, you need lots of money to even just simply walk from one country to the next, and of course that's reprehensible. But again, sometimes, Jean-Jacques Rousseau may be right. You may have to trade off some of your freedom, your personal freedoms, for the securities and the benefits. For instance, none of us have built our own houses. Why? Because the system provides one for us. We take these things for granted. We don't have to go out and kill our own food. Why? Because the local Safeway has it. So there is a certain trade-off of our own personal, needs or whatever freedom for certain securities that the collective can provide. Everyone, as I say, all I'm about is that everyone should be free to come forth with their own take on that. If a man says, I'm against it, I want to roam free, they should be allowed to roam free. That should be made easy for them. If somebody goes, no, I love nationhood, I love my race, it doesn't mean I'm against other races, but I love my traditions, and I want to preserve them, they should be given the right to do that. So it's just about every single person being given the voice.
I completely agree. We do need that global shift in consciousness, but, it's kind of a paradox. I mean, we're never going to get to the point to where people want to take the responsibility to be free. We're never going to get to that point to where people say, okay, this is my life. I don't need a big brother. I don't need a police state. I don't need a nanny state.
They won't grow up.
Well, the original Republican idea, as you well know, was, and certainly Ayn Rand has got this at the forefront of her philosophy, is that you should have government, but it's extremely small and it's only to prevent crime.
Right, that's definitely how we feel as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm for that. And that can be sort of the Native American Indians have what's known as the reservation police.
Yeah, they act more like a social filter for when people hurt other people, there's someone there to correct the problem.
Well, the Danes, who are the ones who created the first parliaments, that's what they had. They had just a committee of elders. There's a thing called the Panchayat, which means the 5 elders in the Sikh religion, where elders will meet in the center. I think they still do it today in the Punjab. 5 elders called the Panchayat, 5 judges will get together to solve any little measly dispute that breaks out, amongst the villagers or what have you, right? And there can even be, sentences and all of this kind of thing. It can be very much built based on the very same systems we've got today, which is with a 12 jury and all of that. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, it's become totalitarian, hasn't it? It's become a bank, just like Jordan Maxwell has pointed out about a million times. The judge is a banker. He's officiating not for a plaintiff and a defendant, but for a creditor and a debtor. That's what we need to get rid of.
Yeah, I mean, that 5 elders thing would work out great, except for the fact that the New World Order always comes in and then pays off all the elders. Well,
that, of course, in a truly awakened,
In a truly awakened world, that wouldn't happen.
No, and remember, it's almost like a game of Russian roulette. If it should happen at this point in time that the world does overthrow the tyrants, I don't think tyranny could ever rise again in the same way. It might try, but it's not gonna work. So there's something really critical at this particular age. So when people talk to me about 2012, that's what I'm talking about. And my take on 2012 has always been psychological and philosophical. For instance, the title of my show, the title of the DVD presentation I did is called, I don't know if anybody's ever noticed this, it says 2012 Where History Ends. It doesn't say when history ends.
Right, it says where history ends.
Yes, absolutely. There's many reasons why I did that. It's because I don't believe in whens. Time is an illusion. And it's so much an illusion that because the Taoists and truly mystical people do not accept time because time imposes a limit on change. This ties into my theories of science. Remember, science is purely collective like religion. No one scientist, by their own definition, can have the full utopian vision of where they're going with all of this technology. So every single scientist knows that in his own lifetime he can only see a piece of the mystery, and therefore he's a link in a chain of men in white suits who always promising you that tomorrow in the future they're going to have the Great Awakening, right? So that by definition makes science collectivist, not spiritual, and not individualistic. That's my big concern philosophically about science. Not that science should stop, let's admit it, that it's only one view. I'm not criticizing science, I'm criticizing scientism, which is the idea that science is the only way that a man could ever understand about the mysteries of the universe. It's total bunk, even by their own with their own definitions of who they are. Secondly, time is a perception of that analogous ego that we talked about. The ego and what it does is rooted in time. The self is not, because the self is aligned with the unconscious, which is the deeds and activities and memories of the whole of mankind from day one, which is out of time, isn't it? The unconscious within you operates in a sort of non-time zone.
In a timeless way.
Yes, because remember, and to prove this to people who find this impossible to grasp, is think of a horse. Instantly, a horse has just appeared in front of you. If I said, bring in a horse, my God, it would take time. Somebody would have to go and get one. They'd have to wheel it in front of you, which it means it has to cross a distance. It has to go at a certain rate of speed. It has to cross a certain space. And it also takes a damn bit of time to wheel a horse in front of your face. But if I say, think of a running horse, think of a white running horse, think of a dolphin leaping out of the water, instantly you're thinking of it. So the real mind is instant, relatively speaking. So that is where the real gnosis of knowledge is, and that's the type of cognition. Now, they promise you that with a technical world, a virtual world, where they're trying to tell you that tomorrow, just by putting on a pair of sunglasses, you'll have the whole data bank in your consciousness. This is utter nonsense, of course. It's just their way of carrot and sticking you to believe in their world order situation. But 2012, where history ends, is because that is individualistic. When something begins, when something ends, I am a person who believes that the place that you're in, because that's where you're standing, that's where your physical body is at. How many times have people often said, well, I remember exactly where I was when JFK was shot?
Or when 9/11 happened.
Right, or 9/11, right. What do they say? Let's take it really slow here. They don't go, well, I remember when I was. They go, I remember where I was. I'll never forget it. Mm-hmm. They always say, I remember, and that place becomes almost sacred to them.
Right.
The day your girlfriend dumps you, you'll never forget that place where it happens. Now, as long as you live, you'll walk around it the next time that you go there, right?
Very true.
So,
yeah.
Right. So it's where, right? The awareness is one of these things that I also bring to the table. Forget about when. Where. Find out how important, from an existential point of view, the awareness is. Which means your ambience, physically, where you are, the trees, what you're looking at, the buildings, the space around you. And when monumental things happen to you, we have been deconditioned, we've been malconditioned to believe it's the when that is important, and of course to a certain degree it is. But much more important, more eternally important, more important to your true self is the awareness of it. Awareness is vitally important. There's even a form of astrology, by the way. I don't exactly remember its name, but it's a horror-y form of astrology that even tells you that you might be living in the wrong area, and they suggest, moving to different cities and towns and stuff. I haven't studied it too much, but there's even a form of astrology that tells you that even the place that you might be in might not even be conducive to you as a soul.
Good point.
I completely agree.
So there's an enormous, and even on a general level, when we go to certain places, don't we feel better there? Or, some people feel horrible in a certain place, or they don't like where they've grown up and they much love it in somewhere else. Or, I used to remember always liking to go I always loved to go to my grandparents' house. I hated where I lived. I hated where my parents lived, because there's so much clutter and chaos. As soon as we always loved to go down to Granddad's, we felt more home there or whatever, even in the district that he lived in.
I always thought it was an energy thing. I feel a weird energy whenever I'm in my hometown. I feel a weird energy. It's like and my father even described it as a vortex. This town is a vortex. It sucks you in and you can never leave. And so whenever I finally left, I felt so much better after I moved to a different town.
I'm a big believer in that. The physiological or the physical, geomantic aspect, yeah. I was speaking in a slightly different context, but you're absolutely right. There is something absolutely true about that, about the location of certain places and how sometimes the energy of it was once great and how not so great. I dealt with that in one of the DVDs about even the way they put these monuments and city fountains and stuff. There's something really evil going on with that, and even the energy of a very beautiful place can be completely transmogrified into something really negative, There's a whole study of that, of course, right, even down to the way you design your house and the room that you live in and all of that.
Yeah, you were talking about how they make the beds a certain width and length just so that you won't get a good night's sleep.
True. It's involved many things. The springs, the metal under it is not good. The size of the actual bed itself and the orientation to the cardinal points is also factors in this as well.
And you suggested that people use sacred geometry.
You take a what's called a rectangle, a golden section rectangle, and just make that out the bed exactly according to a golden section rectangle.
Well, I'm sorry, Michael. I don't mean to interrupt, but I know a lot of people out there are probably lost. We're talking about some information that Michael has on his DVD called Symbolic Literacy, and it's an excellent watch. I suggest everybody goes out there and sees it. But what we're talking about is the golden rectangle and the golden ratio. The golden ratio is 1 to phi. That's PHI, and phi is 1.618. So the golden ratio would be 1.1618. And in the DVD, Michael talks about how you can create your bed out of the golden ratio using a golden rectangle and get a better night's sleep. And I think you also went as far as saying that the cigarette packs are made out of the golden ratio it's in order to make them more soothing, because people will automatically be drawn to that. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, spiritualized. There's a spiritualization. It's also just done in the symbolism, a lot on the advertisements, the proportions of these boxes, the lid opening. There's something very sacred. See, it once was a communal thing. The idea of smoking was always a communal thing, and since man's feeling very existentially estranged in today's world, they have a lot of these rituals with a small R, and even the big ones with a big R, like the football games and matches. And the idea is that, the smoking is somewhat throwback in a way to the time when we sat together and smoked. And that's again a awareness, and it's also awareness. So we all are very conditioned in the Western world to believe in the when of everything for some bizarre reason. But the awareness, again, we can use an example. Every day that comes Monday, the week just rolls around. And yet we are so foolish. Is there even such a real thing as Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday? And secondly, how come that in time we're always repeating the same thing called a week or called a month and called a year? Do you know how irrational that is? And yet here's our conditioning. Is every Monday really like every other Monday? Of course it isn't, right? So, every Monday is something unique to us. It doesn't matter what language you call it in. If you really saw through that, you'd realize that every day is unique. You have less than 70 summers to live in your life. 70. Some people have less. Lucky people have a bit more. That sounds very few, doesn't it, when you think about it? And yet we go in and do this ludicrous thing, imposing this whenness, which is, again, as I said, an extension of the ego in order to make the ego feel secure. But the eternal part of you, that imaginative body of you, doesn't have anything to do with whenness, or only to a very, very small degree. It's the awareness, which is the psychological state to be in when you're thinking about the stuff of your life. Awareness plays an enormous role, as much or if not more. So that's what I did as a tweak. 2012, where history ends, to throw people off, to say, I'm not even talking about Mayan calendar. I'm not even talking about so much of a time chronology type thing. That's, to me, not really what it's about at all. It's about awareness, because you are the only one who can occupy that awareness. Whenness is collective. Everybody occupies the same time. But you can only occupy that space in which you happen to be standing, where fate happened to move you. When you heard about that great thing, or when you heard about that news, or when you heard that your, sister had just given birth to a baby, or, a friend of yours got married, or a person healed from a serious disease. You're not thinking so much about the when at all. You're remembering where it happened, at least on a subconscious level you are.
I completely agree. When we remember a situation, we actually picture it. So you're right on the money with that, Michael. I am your host, Chris Gio, and I'm joined as always by the lovely socio student. We are speaking with Michael Tsarion. You can find his work at michaeltsarion.com, and we're discussing his new DVD, Architects of Control. You can find that at architectsofcontrol.com, and I have to say that it's one of the most phenomenal films that I've seen in the past 10 years. And I've seen them all, ladies and gentlemen, so I recommend that everybody goes out and gets a copy of Architects of Control. Now, the clips that you just heard were from one of his presentations about symbolism, and you can find that at his website, michaeltsarion.com. And, you know, you need to go back and you need to listen to everything that Michael has to say and pick up every one of his DVDs, because the information inside of there is just invaluable. I mean, it's amazing how he can just go on and on and on and on and dig so deep. It's incredible. But I know he's a very humble gentleman, and he doesn't like it when people talk him up like that, even though he deserves it. And like I said in the first broadcast, he's got to be one of the most underrated researchers out there, because he is a foundry of knowledge. Now, Michael, if we can get back to the interview, I really liked what you said in that clip about don't make graven images, and how the ancient world was just riddled with symbolism, and how they are keeping us illiterate to symbols.
Yes, absolutely. And don't forget that we don't even need to go into any of the kind of, fringe stuff we've been talking about. The Bible itself, the book of Mark, the book of John, the book of Revelation, and then the apocryphal works that all biblical scholars acknowledge and accept. Bible believers don't, but Bible scholars do. All of those books, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Peter, they're all talking about that man is the living God. He's the living temple. What I can do, you can do also and more. All evils come from within the human breast. Everything we're talking about the sense of self, can be found in the official documents, in the official works of the great scholars of the Bible. St. Augustine, I've written an article, it's on the Michael Tsarion website, called Disciples of the Mysterium. I have quotes from St. Augustine, that talk about man's selfhood, and that is the prime datum. And yet here we have a religion that gives you one Decalogue, meaning 1 Ten Commandments you must follow, one church, one God, one Jesus, and one heaven. Don't we realize that that's collective? What could be more cookie cutter than that? You believe in this set formula, you do it exactly as everybody else does it. Here's the church, here's the Jesus, here's the God, here's the type of worship we demand of you. And when you all go to heaven, we're not talking about everybody's individual heaven. We're talking about one heaven for all, right, people? That is collectivist. That's what I'm saying about looking at all the factors that don't sound right and don't look like they are truth. My God, that doesn't look like truth to me. And then you see the same thing in the science world, where they're telling you, oh, well, one scientist, not even an Einstein, of course, by their own definition, could really know all the mysteries of the universe. Isaac Newton said, at the end of his life, he said, I feel like a boy who's been walking on the beach, turning over pebbles while the whole ocean of the mystery lies out there in front of me. So the Newtons, the Einsteins, all will tell you themselves that the reason is not enough, a single human life is not long enough, there's an infinite things to know, but we only have one lifetime to know it in. And I go screeching to a halt at that point. I go, stop! What did you just say? You're telling me the philosophical truism that there is infinite things to know, but only one life to know it in? And you're even saying that reason, although it's a great thing, is not up to the job? Okay, that seems to make sense. I hear what you're saying, because now I have the voice of the Taoist in my other ear saying, we told you that. And then I turn to them and I say, yeah, but well, quickly repeat it, because this is huge. What do you believe? And the Taoist goes, well, we've been telling you that. There's infinite things to know and one life to know it. Don't you think that that's a paradox that would stop you in the middle of the street and go, Jesus, I think I've been had? Obviously, it implies that time and mind is not enough, because the kind of mind that you're using, by their own definition, by their own principles, is not enough. The length of your own lifetime is not enough. And you don't need to be René Descartes to point that out. It's obvious. It's an axiomatic. Therefore, we now have to open our minds to listen to what the J. Krishnamurtis and the Taoists and others of that ilk are saying, where they're saying, oh, yeah, you can know all there is to know, but you're not going to know it through scientism. And you're not going to know it through religion because those are based in time and they are based in collectivism. Collectivism means that it's not about you individually knowing anything, it's about the species. Scientism because it's again in the future. That is why the Taoist has nothing to do with collective movements. He's got nothing to do with what other people think about it or groups. He's only there to dialogue with the individual or speak as an individual to say there must be some kind of mentation, some kind of rapport, some kind of communion in which man can know all there is to know in this life. Because if in fact we buy into what we've been told by the world that no, you can't, then there really ultimately is no purpose for life at all. We have to, as human beings, realize that there is the possibility of knowing all there is to know in one lifetime. If you don't come from that as a precept, then I think we are doing severe violence to our own self. It doesn't make any physical sense. It doesn't make any mental or psychological sense to even be alive then. So obviously we know, like we said earlier, find out what doesn't ring true. Well, now we've known from just this little few words that science is not true and religion is not true. We've come a long way in just a couple of sentences. Now we're open to say, well then, since I know that, let me go and explore then the dynamics of that, to find out maybe there's some other kind of mentality, some other kind of a communion. And then in one ear we remember what the ancients were saying. The ancients have always said that man has fallen from a great height, that man once was standing at the font of all wisdom, that man was standing at 0 degrees latitude, 0 degrees longitude of his own globe of consciousness. There was a time when he was rooted directly to the real. It's only moderns are telling us, oh no, we're progressing. We were primitive and rude in the past. Well, wait a minute, that's exactly the opposite of what all ancient people, even those living today, not ancient people, but primitive people today, and representing the ancients of the myths and legends, always tell us that man had direct access, then he fell. Even the Christians agree with this. Well, if you agree with that, it implies that at one point in time we were connected to the total real. We were totally in touch with what it was all about, and we had that kind of thought, shall we say, in parentheses, that linked us to the all-knowing. What is that? Is it nature? Is she our creator that we've never acknowledged and don't even notice when we're walking in it? Or do we want to believe about gods hiding behind the clouds, perhaps? Or is it she out there, that thing you see every day out there called the world? You are it and it is you and you are created by it? What happens if at the end of this big analysis it turns out that nature is your creator? Then what we're doing to nature, does that make any blinking sense? And even what we're not doing to nature is equally as important, meaning not noticing it, not realizing that every tree is a brother and a sister, every stone, the very light is our relative. My God, we're living in a total absence of being, like the great philosopher Heidegger said. We are living in he called it thrownness into the world. Jim Morrison also used in Riders on the Storm, because he was into philosophy and he knew this word thrownness means, it's a famous term from Heidegger, said you're thrown into the world and you're fallen into the world. You're not awakened. And you're not only not awakened, but the world, the language of the things of the world, you've lost, you've forgotten. You're like a radio frequency that's out of frequency. You're like a detuned guitar. So the things of the world, the very song of the rocks, the stones, the mountains, the sky, you're no longer hearing it like your ancients did before. There's no communion anymore, except through dreams and a little artistry here and a little, musicianship there. But on the whole, man himself has lost his roots. The Native American Indians have said this till they're blue in the face. The Druids taught this. The animal shapes of Egypt. Why are all the gods with animal heads? Why does the word neter, which meant God, also mean nature in Egyptian? Because they understood the theriomorphism that used to be, before the religions, these evil Luciferian religions arose, worshipping the sun with Akhenaten, and man becomes the most important thing separate from nature. He thinks nature is separate from him. And then with that comes the massacre of female Wicca tribes and all that modality of thought and slaughtering the animals and brutalizing nature. And then we give ourselves over to the science and religion that I've already proved is false. And it's not me. You go to the Heideggers, go to the Schopenhauers, go to the Nietzsches. They're telling you, they're pointing it out. The contradiction anyone can work out in 5 minutes. You have infinite things to know, but you can't because you have a short life. Then something must be wrong. And that then draws your attention to the fact that time is not your friend, and that the thinking patterns that you're using now of the ego are also not up to the job. But that doesn't mean that that's the end of it, and you just live fatalistically or pessimistically. The ancients have always swore blind that there was another form of rapport, communion, whatever,